Hello there. When most people think of the Prince of Persia video game series, they most likely think of the Sands of Time trilogy, which was released by Ubisoft back in 2003, along with two additional games. But Prince of Persia is actually much older than a lot of people realize. Prince of Persia actually started as a late 80s side-scroller designed by Mechnar. I've played this classic version and it's good, especially for its time, but I'm just going to be looking at the Ubisoft console releases. At its peak, Ubisoft put out one game a year, and after the trilogy concluded, Ubisoft gave the series a 3-year break before rebooting the series, and then 2 years later they added another game to the Sands of Time continuity, and then nothing has come from the series since 2010. That's 9 years! The Prince of Persia series is virtually forgotten. How does that happen? How does a venerable series like Prince of Persia put out 3 critically acclaimed games in the mid-2000s and then just die? Well, that's what I'm here to find out. What the hell happened to Prince of Persia? Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, 2003. It was Christmas of 2005. I was a boy, and my parents gave me a game for Christmas, and that game was Terminator 3 Redemption. My sister got Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time. She pretty much only played The Sims, so I got to play Prince of Persia whenever I got bored with Terminator. Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time starts off with our nameless prince's father invading India with the assistance of a treacherous Vizier. What are they after? An hourglass filled with the sands of time which Shahriman, the king of Persia, wants to give to Azad as a symbol of eternal unity, while the prince seeks the dagger of time, which we see that the Vizier has some plans of his own, and when the prince's army gets to Azad, the Vizier tricks the prince into unleashing the sands of time, corrupting the whole kingdom, and turning everyone into monsters that you have to fight. But he's not alone. He has an ally in the daughter of the Maharaja who will help him stop the Vizier. Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time's gameplay consists of platforming, puzzles, and combat. The combat is very fluid. The prince probably had the most animations of any video game character back in the day, with 750 animations. You fight with 4 different swords throughout the game, as well as the Dagger of Time, which is used to finish off enemies and manipulate time, reverse time, slow down time, freeze your enemies, and speed up your own movements and kill your enemies quickly. And after killing all of the enemies in a room, a spiral of glowing sand appears and you can see a vision of the future before saving. Most of the time the visions are just showing you where to go. Other times the visions are quite ominous. You can also use the environment to aid you in a fight, pretty much just by jumping off walls. Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time is perhaps most remembered for its platforming. You climb huge towers, evade traps, open bridges, and you do this in these beautifully rendered environments. Back in the day you were probably mesmerized by the amount of detail put into the towers, or how the light shone through smoke, by the haunting but still pleasant silence of darkness, or the sound of moving water. According to the making of, the developers wanted the soundtrack to feel Persian but without being Persian. I think that what they meant by that is that they wanted the game's soundtrack to be distinctive. Since most games don't use Persian music as a template, this game has an edge. The vocalizations are good, and I like how at times the music sounds vaguely Indian. I kind of like Indian music. But where the game's music really succeeds is that when you hear it, you know it's Prince of Persia. Partway through the game, the prince reaches the hourglass, but he doesn't trust Farah, the Maharaja's daughter, and hesitates. The Vizier then appears and summons a sandstorm, but the prince and Farah escape into a tomb. After they share a dream of a magic heaven that opens up after Farah tells him his secret word to open it, Kakalukiam. Yeah, look, it's important for later. Also, she never told anyone else the word before. Farah steals the Dagger of Time and the Prince's sword and goes for the Tower of Dawn herself, which is where the hourglass is being kept. But when he finally catches up to her, she's being overwhelmed by sand monsters and is facing her death as the prince holds on to save her. But Farah lets go. Farah is dead. The prince, devastated, finally closes the sands of time and reverses time to just before his father's army invaded. The prince runs for Farah and tells her everything, including about the treacherous Vizier, but he arrives to stop the prince. However, given that the prince is young and the Vizier is old, the prince kills him. The prince then leaves to tell his father to pull back his forces. Farah asks the prince's name. The prince says, "Just call me Kakalukiam," and then he disappears, leaving Farah shocked. That is one of my favorite subtle and ambiguous endings to a video game ever, and I love the theme that plays over the end credits. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time rightly deserves its acclaim, and will likely open up the door for other action platformers such as God of War, and is a strong start to a trilogy. Prince of Persia: Warrior Within, 2004. How is this not better? Seriously, everything that was great from Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is arguably better here. The action, the combat, the platforming, the traps. There's a lot more that you can do in a fight. You can strangle your enemies, throw them over edges, steal their weapons, fight with multiple weapons. You can also do more with the environment, bounce off walls, run along walls, cutting you through enemies, swing around columns, or jump onto a wall, bounce off that wall, and cut through an enemy. As opposed to the previous game, which had maybe 2 boss fights, end quote, Warrior Within has like 6, and at times you get chased by an unstoppable demon hell-bent on your destruction. Sounds good? Better than Sands of Time? Well, it isn't. Why? Sands of Time had its fair share of darkness, but tried to balance it out with humor and charm. Warrior Within, however, decided to commit to a darker tone. Critics at the time didn't enjoy it. The original creator of Prince of Persia, Mechnar, who worked on Sands of Time but not Warrior Within, had this to say of the 2004 video game. "I'm not a fan of the artistic direction, or the violence that entered an M rating. The story, character, dialogue, voice acting, and visual style were not to my taste." So yeah, the game is darker, but I don't consider that to be a substantive criticism against the game. The game wanted to be darker, and went darker. I'm not going to criticize the game for doing what it set out to do. But the game commits to the darker tone without thinking about the player. When I play Sands of Time, I feel a sense of joy, a sense of anxiety and fear and frustration. When I play Warrior Within, a lot of the time, I just feel numb. I feel nothing! The distinctive and beautiful Persian-inspired music from Sands of Time is absent here, replaced with very generic rock music. I can't say that the tracks are actually bad on their own, but compared to what we had before, damn it, I miss what we had before. And as for a game that wants to be darker and more serious, why is one of the first things that should show us a woman's ass? I mean, that's just downright comical of a game that wants to be so serious. Whatever, story time. 7 years after the events of the first game, the prince is being chased by an unstoppable force, the Dahaka, seeking to kill him for unleashing the sands of time and escaping death. The prince learns of a palace called the Island of Time from an old man and travels there with a ship and crew to prevent the sands of time's creation. So the Dahaka won't chase him anymore, but his ship is destroyed and his men are killed by the ass woman. The prince conveniently washes ashore the island as the prince chases the ass woman. Alright, her name is Shadee. As he chases Shadee through the island's fortress, he discovers portals that can take him between the island's ruinous present and its prosperous past. Eventually he catches up to Shadee as she's about to kill another skimpily dressed woman. We later learned that she's the Empress of Time, and I don't know why, but it makes a bit more sense for her to dress skimpy. Also, she's voiced by Monica Bellucci. The prince kills Shadee, the other woman is named Kaileena, and when he enters the throne room to speak to the Empress, Kaileena tries to kill him because she's fated to be killed by him, and so he kills her even though he doesn't want to. Her death accidentally creates the sands of time, and the Dahaka continues chasing him. The prince briefly gives up and awaits death, until he conveniently brushes his hand against a Deus Ex Machina that gives him a MacGuffin to find so he can go back further in time and prevent the sands from being made. He finds a MacGuffin and runs around dressed like a mummy for a bit, until he can take it off and confront Kaileena again. But this time fights her in the present and kills her there. The Dahaka shows up, vaporizes her, takes the prince's medallion which was left behind by Farah, it's never explained, and the Dahaka disappears. The prince sails back for Babylon and finds the city under siege. But that's the fake ending. The real ending is only playable if you collect all life upgrades and acquire the water sword, and instead of fighting Kaileena at the end, you fight the Dahaka. After you beat him, you and Kaileena sail back for Babylon, and they share one of the weirdest sex scenes ever, as we intercut with scenes of Babylon under siege, and a dark figure picks up the king's crown, proclaiming, "All that is yours is rightfully mine, and mine it will be." I might be being a bit harsh on Warrior Within. It does have a lot of good to it. The combat is greatly improved, as is the platforming, and the environments are quite creative at times, while being quite bland at others. There's more content such as the concept art for characters and environments and a weapons database, and clips from the game's cinematics. Another thing that I can say in the game's favour is the song I Stand Alone by Godsmack. An instrumental version of the song plays over the Dahaka chases, and I like this song, and I'm quite glad that I first heard it here. I think that it even thematically fits the prince's journey, specifically how he's trying to change his fate all by himself. Prince of Persia Warrior Within is still a mixed bag. The next game will have to change something. Prince of Persia The Two Thrones 2005. After Warrior Within's mixed reception, The Two Thrones decided that its course of correction would be to go lighter. Is this an artistic redemption, or is it pandering to the haters? That's what I'm here to decide. First, in Sands of Time, the prince was voiced by Yuri Lowenthal. In Warrior Within, he was, for unknown reasons, replaced by Robin Atkin Downes. Lowenthal returns as the prince in Two Thrones. I can't help but suspect that this was an attempt to get back some fans who might have preferred Lowenthal over Downes. And the game doesn't stop there. In addition to voice actors, it also brings back Farah and the Vizier from Sands of Time, though their original voice actors don't return. You know, come to think of it, this game was pretty much the Star Wars The Force Awakens of video games, 10 years before Force Awakens was even released. Look, we have the original actors! Look, we brought back the original characters! There's less of the stuff you hated! We're listening to you! Please like us again! Anyway, our game starts with the prince discarding his medallion into the ocean, as he and Kaileena sail for Babylon. But they return to the city under siege, and their vessel gets destroyed, and they get separated. As Kaileena is brought deep into the palace, you chase after her. Unlike the previous games where the prince's primary weapon was a sword, in this game the prince's primary weapon is a dagger. But like in the previous game, you can pick up secondary weapons from the ground, or take them from an enemy. You find that Babylon has been captured by the Vizier, and he uses the Dagger of Time to kill Kaileena and absorb the sands of time from her and become, in his words, a god. but you take the dagger and escape, but you're corrupted from the sands, and on occasion, your body mutates into a sand monster. You keep your mind, and you also have a bladed whip to fight enemies with. But your life slowly fades away unless you continually kill enemies for their sand, or reach a water source to return you to normal. If you've played these games, we're probably thinking the same thing, but I'll return to this. But before we move on, the prince also acquires an inner voice. The prince has to fight his way back to Babylon with the inner voice's aid. Eventually he finds Farah fighting and trying to help as many people as she can. This is actually a source of conflict between the two. Farah actively tries to help as many people as possible, and perceives the prince as selfishly turning his back on his people to kill the Vizier. But the prince thinks that killing the Vizier should be a priority. Eventually the prince comes to realize that he has been selfish, and that it's been developing internally, and also from the inner voice's influence. So after he finds his father's corpse, he banishes the voice and scales the Tower of Babel, and faces the Vizier. The fight with the Vizier is not all that fun to play, but the final stab at the Vizier is pretty iconic. After the Vizier dies, his army evaporates, and Kaileena returns as a ghost made of glowing sand. She cures the prince's arm and leaves this world, unquote. The prince and Farah see a crown roll on the ground. The prince kneels to pick it up, but a dark hand seizes it. It's the prince's monster form speaking in the prince's inner voice. He didn't come from the corruption from the sands of time. He's a split personality, and he's attempting to take the prince's body. I'm not sure if I buy that, but this is a fun level. The Dark Prince pulls the prince into the prince's own mind, and verbally and emotionally attacks him, as the prince has to chase him through this trippy level that the previous games never did anything like. We see recreated levels from previous games, and though it's cool, not enough is done with it. Perhaps fittingly, it's Farah that gets the prince out. She says that this place is a house of pain and anger, and that he just needs to turn away, and leads him up a staircase into the light. The Dark Prince tells him to leave. The prince actually climbs the stairs as the Dark Prince continues mocking him. But as the prince approaches closer to the top of the stairs, the Dark Prince starts getting desperate and starts bargaining with the prince and begs him not to leave. But the prince does, and the Dark Prince can only call out, "No," as he faces oblivion. The prince wakes up to Farah, and they look over the city of Babylon. Farah, having no memory of what happened in Sands of Time, asks the prince how he knew her name. His answer begins with, "Most people think time is like a river that flows swift and sure in one direction, but I have seen the face of time, and I can tell you they're wrong. Time is an ocean in a storm. You may wonder who I am and why I say this. Come, and I will tell you a tale like none you have ever heard." So yeah, the Dark Prince's gameplay mechanics is lifted from the Sandwraith's gameplay from Mori Within. This game takes a few more things from Mori Within. The animation for the subterranean enemies are similar to a class of enemy from Mori Within. These enemies are literally the same as from Mori Within, only painted green. And you fight a giant that reuses animations from Mori Within. Oh, and remember how in Mori Within you had to go through a hallway of traps before achieving your life upgrades? This game redoes that too! You know, for a game that needed to go in a different direction from Mori Within, this game sure does take a lot of stuff from Mori Within. Now, even though I'm making fun of this game for what it reuses, it does a lot of new stuff. Like what? Well, it adds a few new traps, keeping the platforming fresh. One thing that Mori Within undeniably improved over Sands of Time was the combat system. The Two of Thrones keeps it, and we also get to fight using the Dark Prince's Daggertail fighting system at times, which is also fun. It took until the halfway point for the prince to start running around bare-chested in Sands of Time, and he keeps his armor on throughout Warrior Within. In the Two Thrones, he spends most of the game shirtless, and just look at those sexy abs. That's hot. This introduces the speed kill system, and I like this mechanic. You sneak around and try to kill your enemies without them noticing. It's a stealth function, and we hadn't seen this in the previous games. I also really like the chariot races. Prince of Persia had never done anything like this before, and unfortunately we never get them again in the later games. The only real criticism that I have against them is that we have so few of them. The first one is very brief, and the second one is also the last one, and is perhaps a bit too long. And you likely used up all your sands getting through it, and now you have to fight through a boss battle without saving! And although the music isn't as distinct as from the Sands of Time, it's much less generic than the music from Warrior Within. And I really like the song I Still Love You. That's the song by Stuart Churchward, sung by Mayim Tola, that plays over the end credits. There's something nice but also haunting about it. Listen to it on Spotify or YouTube. Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones is better balanced than the previous games, and gets the most right. All of the games throughout the Sands of Time trilogy have their strong and weak components, but overall they're very good games. The combat, platforming are strong all the way throughout, and the graphics are quite good for their time. If you've yet to play them, give them a go. But this is important to me. Make sure you play the original PlayStation 2 versions. If you have a newer system like, say, a PlayStation 3, you could get the trilogy on a remastered port, and if that's what you want, that's fine. And yes, the environments do look better, but the characters have too much detail, and it makes them look jagged and blocky in a way that they never did before. Also, the prince's mouth looks like ass throughout Warrior Within, and when you play as the Dark Prince on PS2, his skin is a dull, dark bluish color, with glowing yellow marks spiraling around his body that fades as he loses health. On the PS3 system, he looks like he's about to run out of health all the friggin' time. But ultimately, the games are good enough that it doesn't really matter which system you play them on.